Hi, everybody, and welcome back to what might be the last video in this Firebase Semi-live series. So up until now, we've created a bunch of cloud functions that are listening to our billing notification pub subtopic and displaying various messages in our various Slack rooms with various degrees of worry, depending on sort of how things are looking in terms of how much we're spending, how much we're going to spend, our most recent spending rate, things like that. So in this video, I'm going to do a couple little kind of security related cleanups, make our code a little more secure. And then I'm going to add in the thing that I know a lot of you have been asking for, which is, add in some kind of kill switch so that we can really, definitely actually kill our application if, we've spent over X dollars a month, that sort of thing. Now, I'm going to give you still some warnings around this, proceed with caution and all that, but, I'll show you how to do it. So let's dig into the code. So the first thing I'm going to do is, let me see here. One concern I have is that you'll notice my test function here, this exports fake pub sub. If I deploy this, I can still call this, right? This is just a plain old HTTPS call. People could kind of figure out this URL, and if they knew what my code was, they could actually go ahead and start calling it with sort of, fake billing messages and warning messages. And we don't want that to happen, right? Like, I don't want other people to suddenly, be sending me fake alerts, telling me that my spending is, going out of control. Or even worse, if I have a kill switch set up, sending me a fake alert that says, oh, it looks like you've spent $1,000 and, activating my kill switch. So this has been great for developing locally using the emulator suite. But I really want to make sure that this does not end up being sort of callable out on production. So I suppose one way of doing it would be to kind of, delete this function before I, go ahead and deploy. I'm not sure I'm always going to remember to do that or, remember to comment this out. So another way of doing this, a little trick that, again, David East taught me. David East, he's so helpful, is you can figure out if this is being run within the emulator by, I'm going to create a little variable is emulated. And I can do that by looking at process env. And this basically sort of looks at, the environment and all the associated environment variables that are set up, when this cloud function is being run. And I can look for functions emulator. And basically, if this thing exists, then I know that I'm calling this locally and it's okay to call this function because I'm probably, doing some development. But I know that if this doesn't exist, then this means that this function is probably being called out in production and we don't want to proceed any further. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say response.send. It looks like you're calling this in production, and I'm just going to return. So I think in theory now, if I were to go ahead and just sort of call this again locally, everything should still kind of work. Yep. Yeah, no changes there. But if I were to deploy this, and maybe I'll do that and come back into it later, what you'll see is that if I were to call this actually out on my production service, it will just sort of return early and not actually go through and do any of this, send any alerts to my Slack channel, that sort of thing. So you know what? Let's do that so you can see that. All right, well, while that's happening, I'm going to go ahead and deal with the second thing that I kind of wanted to clean up here within my cloud function, which is up here. I still have this Slack access token that I am defining right here in my code. And I found the little best practices for security documentation, where one of the things they mention is store these bot user tokens with care, never place them in a public code repository or client-side code like JavaScript. Now, this obviously doesn't reside in client-side code, but if I were to accidentally check this into GitHub because I'm creating a sample project and I leave this in, suddenly people are like, oh great, I can go ahead and start sending messages as this bot. So probably a slightly smarter way of doing this is if you were to look in, let's look at our Firebase Cloud Functions, set environment variables. One of the things they show you is that there is this CLI command, Firebase functions config set, where you can then basically just sort of set various variables, some service.key equals the API key. Maybe that could be slack.token equals my access token. And then you'll be able to retrieve it within the Cloud function by calling the functions config library and simply getting at that code. So let's do that. And actually, you know what? Now that this is done deploying, I'm going to go ahead and just show you where is my fake pub sub function. Let me just copy and paste this. And yep, looks like you're calling this in production. Nothing will have happened. Even if I were to call this with some fake data, it's simply just going to return out of this early, which is what we want. So yay, that works. Okay, but going back to saving our environment variables. So let's do that. So I'm going to call Firebase functions config set. And let's call it slack.accessToken equals. And let me go ahead and copy this out of my code. So now basically this environment variable is going to be set, both here locally in my emulator, as well as you can see when I call Firebase deploy only functions, it will set this environment variable in production as well. So in fact, let me call that. And that's done. Actually, if I call Firebase functions config get, we'll see basically what it's stored in there. Basically sort of looks like a little JSON-y thing where I can see a little entry called Slack and within there an entry called access token. So now what I can do is in my code, I'll delete this. And actually, maybe what I'll do is I'll just call within here functions.config, and then I'm gonna call slack.accessToken, basically the entry that's there in my JSON-y looking object. So I'm gonna save this and make sure that deployed okay. Yep. And let me rerun this with just increase our spending by a couple pennies. And looks like you're trying to access functions config Slack, but there's no value there. What did I do wrong? Let's see. I wonder if maybe the problem is, let's follow. Okay. So here's the problem is I have actually gone ahead and defined my environment variables, but those don't get read into the emulator. And so what I need to do basically is first run this command to get my custom config in my local environment. Am I in my functions directory? I'm going to go into my functions directory. And then I'm going to call Firebase functions config get to runtime config.json. Do I actually need to run Firebase functions shell? Oh yeah, no, this is just restarting the emulator. Let me just stop and restart the emulators. Make sure that all seems to be working okay. All right, so apparently for my local emulators, in order to get those environment variables, I have to basically call functions config get and save that to a runtime config.json file, which then our cloud functions will read in when I start them up. So now I think everything should work again. Let me just call this, say that we're going to spend 30 cents now. All right, now it seems to be talking to Slack, and there you go. Within Slack, I seem to now be getting my messages again. So cool, we solved that, and I feel a little better now that that access token is no longer there in my code. So let's move on to adding a kill switch. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and sort of look into our documentation and follow along for most of this. Cloud billing pub sub function. There you go. Examples of automated cost control responses. I never remember what title to search for. But basically, here's our cap disable billing to stop usage. So I'm going to follow along, generally speaking, with what's in here. I'm going to be deviating a little bit from exactly what's in this documentation in a few places, partly just because I'm using TypeScript, partly because I'm using Firebase Cloud Functions, which already does set up a few things for me already, and partly because there's a couple places where I sort of wonder if this documentation is a little out of date. So before I do, let's hit you up with the warnings again. So the function I'm about to write, or I will eventually write, is going to be one that is going to essentially disable billing in my project when I reach a certain threshold. And this is bad for a couple of reasons. First, it might be that, my app is incurring lots of billing costs because it's very popular. And, as a company, I'm super excited and really happy that, I've done whatever it takes for my idea to go viral, and I'm made the front page of Reddit, and I'm about to get in those millions of customers that I've been trying to get, for months. And then all of a sudden what they find is that my app has broken on them. So, really, I do still feel like this is a situation where you want to get a human involved first for them to kind of decide, like, do I actually want to kill my app? Or, maybe I want to, accept those costs because, yay, my app is a hit. And, it's really hard to get one of those hits. However, I know there are some situations, like you are a student working on a weekend hackathon project that you don't really intend to ever share with the world, where no, if I'm getting a lot of usage, something is really wrong. There's no reason for this to be going viral. And so in those situations, maybe you really do want to shut things down. And I should warn you, in the documentation here, we do have this big red warning box that says, this is not going to shut down gracefully, right? This is the equivalent of pulling the power cord out of your console while it's displaying that little icon that's like, please don't turn off your console. Your game is automatically being saved. You are probably going to lose some data as a few functions fail or Cloud Firestore fails or that sort of thing, as you run into sort of what's going to suddenly look like quota exceeded errors because you have disabled billing. So, just be aware of that as well. This is not a graceful shutting down. This is a pulling the plug out of the wall kind of shutdown. So with those two caveats in mind, let's go ahead and actually finish up this kill switch. So we've essentially kind of done a lot of the work already, where we've created a budget. We have a cloud function that is listening to our pub sub. And the first thing we're going to need it to do is, let's see if we can get it to talk to our billing. So there's a lot going on here. I don't want to disable billing yet. First, let's look at this is billing enabled function. This basically seems to be getting billing info from the billing service. So maybe let's start there. Let's go ahead and get our billing info and just kind of print that out. Let's kind of see what we get before we start going ahead and, actually disabling things. Because I want to make sure that our cloud function can properly talk to the billing service. So first thing I'm going to do is, it looks like we need to be talking to the Google APIs, because that's where we're going to be basically getting the cloud billing. We're going to be accessing sort of the cloud billing library. So I'm going to go into my functions directory, and I'm going to call npm install Google APIs, save. And once that's done, I'm going to go into my code. And up here, I am going to import Google from Google APIs. There we go. Took a little while to figure it out, but it's there now. And then let's see here. And we'll say, const billing equals Google dot, you say cloud billing, and in here you're going to put the version number, which right now, I think has to be v1. And then we're actually also going to just be looking at projects. I'm basically essentially sort of doing what they're doing in this code here. So this is going to be sort of getting billing information for various projects. And so let's start by create a function, export, we'll say get billing info equals functions HTTPS on request. And in here, we're going to, let's say we're going to need to get our project name. And it looks like we do that by getting our project ID variable and then basically sort of attaching that onto project slash. So I guess we can do that up here. Right? Yeah, let's put it up here. All right. Project ID equals process and Google Cloud Project. And then project name, or actually project name equals, and we'll call it projects project ID. And then down here, what we can do is billing info equals await billing, get billing info. And basically we're passing in a list of parameters, and I believe the parameter we're passing in is name, project name. And here, let's console log. Here's what I have from billing. And let's call util.inspect and on this billing info. And then response.send. Hold on, check your logs. All right, will that be enough to work? Let's find out. Well, it seems to compile. And it looks like we now have a new function initialized. So let's grab that and curl it. All right, getting error, login required. All right, and yes, that's because it's having trouble getting access to Cloud Billing V1 projects. Wait, undefined? Why is it undefined? That's interesting. I can tell you the reason this is, I think, is undefined is, let me show you. If we look at Google Cloud Functions environment variables, they do say that in here, Google Cloud Project and G Cloud Project are used for your current, GCP project ID. However, that's only under node 8, and I'm using node 10. And it looks like under node 10, it sets fewer environment variables than previous runtimes. So it kind of looks like maybe this is not being set. However, if we were to look in our Firebase Cloud Function environment variables documentation, it looks like here they are telling us that G Cloud Project and Firebase config do seem to be automatically set. So what's right? Should I trust that maybe Firebase is going ahead and adding G Cloud Project? Maybe, but let's go back to my favorite way of figuring things out, and that's console debugging. So here, I'm gonna do a little console log, and I'm gonna say, here's all your environment variables. And what we will do is, now you recall that we were actually able to get our environment variable essentially earlier, way back in our fake pub sub function, right? Like we looked at process.env, and in this case, we looked for an entry called functions emulator. I think if I just spit out process.env, this should give us, I believe, a list of all of our environment variables. Oops, here, you know what? Sorry, let's put this up here first. There we go. Oh, object. Thanks. All right, forgot to call util.inspect on it. By the way, people have also said, hey, you could probably use JSON stringify on this. I imagine that would work too. But at this point, I'm used to calling util.inspect. I like it. All right. So, well, look at this. We've got all sorts of interesting environment variables here. You can see functions emulator equal true. So that's that environment variable we used earlier to be like, hey, make sure we only run this function if we're running it locally. But then it looks like here we have both our G Cloud project, which is set to Semi-live money spender, as well as our Firebase config. And you notice this also has a project ID variable that is set to Semi-live money spender. And these should always be the same. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this G Cloud project. So it looks like the Firebase documentation was correct. It does grab this environment variable called G Cloud project. So if I do this, and then I rerun my function, I'm still going to get that login required error. but at least now it looks like it is looking at the billing info for the right project. It now has the correct project name. It's not undefined. So yay, still getting errors, but at least now I think we can go ahead and continue to write out our function like normal. So let's go back to our documentation and proceed from there. So it looks like probably the next thing we actually need to do is go ahead and set our auth credentials. So this is basically happens through the set auth credential function, where we're basically going to tell our Google service, you know what, go ahead and authorize yourself with a client that's requesting these scopes, cloud billing and cloud platform. And that should give my function, hopefully, the access it needs to go ahead and talk to cloud billing. So I'm gonna just mostly here, let's copy and paste this. Will this just work? Let's find out. So here I'm gonna write a little function called set credentials for billing, something like that. I don't need to call this, within every function, obviously, just the ones where I need to talk to my billing service. So let's just copy and paste this. And right, Google Auth is also a library that I need to install. I didn't do that earlier, and now it's coming back to bite me. So let's go into my functions directory, npm install Google Auth library. Save. Let's do that. Back here, I'm going to import, I think it's like Google Auth from Google Auth library. And that will now make this happy. And so now up here, let's call set credentials for billing and see if that fixes it. We're happy there. So I'm going to run this. It worked. Honestly, this kind of surprises me that this works. And I think the reason is I am calling this as, I don't know if this is entirely right. Here's my suspicion. Because I'm running this locally as my, Ned Tully owner account, I have full access to this cloud function, to my billing. So this cloud function is sort of properly set up and credentialed and actually ready to talk to my billing service. However, I have actually deployed this. And if I were to run this on production, I get an error. And if I were to go into my logs here, well, actually, I'm getting a couple errors that are sort of surprising, or maybe not surprising. The first is that the Cloud Billing API has not actually been enabled for this project. Kind of surprised I'm able to even call it locally, but let's do that first. This is actually something that is mentioned in the documentation. There it is, enable the Cloud Billing API, and I haven't done that, so let's enable that. Make sure I've got the proper project set up. Okay, excellent. All right, a couple minutes later, I'm going to just run this function one more time, wait for my logs to appear. Yeah, sure enough, things seem to be working, which again surprises me a little bit. I thought there was a lot of other auth stuff I had to do in order to access my billing information from a cloud function. But you can see here, it's got, like my billing account name, and billing enabled seems to be true. So apparently I have access to everything I need to talk to billing from my cloud function. This still seems a little weird. I'm going to show you what I did before anyway to get this working, but it may or may not be necessary apparently. Because, well, I'll just show you what's in the documentation, and maybe this is something we have to do, but maybe not. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to find the service account that is running our cloud functions. So I'm going to go ahead and within like the Google Cloud Console, I'm just going to go ahead and under Cloud Functions, I'm going to find like my get billing info function. And under details, I can see that, this is being called essentially by my semi-live money spender at appspot.gserviceaccount.com service account. And what I thought I had to do is go into my billing section, under account management, head on over and add a member. And in this case, I would add that service account that is there. And you know what? Maybe I do need to do that if I want to actually maybe I still need to do this if I actually want to change or alter my billing. So do this if you find out that you run into errors later trying to essentially turn billing off. So I'm basically going to add the service account to the billing account administrator role, and I will save that. That's what I did before. Like I said, kind of surprised I didn't have to do it just now. Again, maybe some of you see the obvious error and tell me in the comments. Hey everybody, so that last video, it was starting to get kind of long. I thought, you know what, maybe we should break it up into two so that, you don't have to sit through a 40-minute video all in one sitting. So we're going to stop right here where we were able to successfully communicate with our billing service, and we will pick it up next video where we will finally go ahead and make the call that disables billing and pulls the plug on our project. So I will see you on the next video. Thanks everyone.